You heard our conversation yesterday, didn't you? My eldest son and his wife are coming back home for the birth of their child, so I need you to move your stuff out to the yard. Excuse me? You can't have kids anyway. You don't help with my son's work. So, the least you could do is make some room. And I'm paying $10,000 in rent. This is getting too tiresome to deal with. I live with my mother-in-law, but now she wants me out of the house because my brother-in-law and his wife are returning. My mother-in-law, brother-in-law, his wife, and my husband. This house is full of problems. I've been trying to keep things running smoothly, but it's becoming a hassle to think about it all. I'm done thinking. Okay, I'll leave. But I can't just put my belongings in the yard, so I'll come back later to pick them up. You're leaving? Thank you. That's a big help. Ignoring my pleased mother-in-law, I started packing my things and left the house. 7 seconds after stepping out the door, I took out my phone and called a junk removal service. Once I stopped thinking, no one could stop my actions. I'm Anna, a 40-year-old IT consultant. My husband Tom is also 40 and runs 3 restaurants as a sole proprietor. We're both 40, and people often assume we've been married a long time and have a kid or two, but we're actually newlyweds. We both lived as workaholics and didn't marry until this age. I had given up on marriage just before turning 40, but a random visit to a bar after work changed my mind. Is this your first time here? Yes, that's right. I had been curious about it for a while, but it was hard for me to go in alone because the store is so stylish. But I worked hard today, so I decided to go in as a reward to myself. I was relieved to find a counter where it was easy for a loner to spend time. We have many women who come alone, so feel free to visit anytime. My husband, Tom, chatted with me with a smile as I sat at the end of the bar. I knew he was just trying to attract a new customer. But for me, who had no casual acquaintances to dine with at this age, even this kind of customer service felt nice. Feeling comfortable in Tom's restaurant, I started visiting frequently. As a regular, I always sat at the end of the bar, and it became normal for Tom to chat with me while I ate. What does an IT consultant do? Introducing IT to companies, strategic planning. I've worked with restaurants too. Once, I suggested a tablet-based ordering system to reduce labor costs and improve efficiency. Oh, the system that's become common? How much does that cost? Well, for a place like this, it would cost about this much. No way, no way. That's too much for a small business like mine. As I punched numbers into my phone calculator and showed him the screen, Tom shook his head and hands vigorously. He's curious and always eager to learn from our conversations. He's looking for ways to apply new knowledge to his work. Even though it looked like just a pleasant conversation, I was slowly drawn to his dedication to his work. Likewise, Tom grew fond of me, seeing that I was a hard-working person. I'm always busy with work and can't talk much. How about we go out for dinner sometime? Excited about the chance to dine with a restaurateur, I eagerly agreed. I was thrilled to be asked out by my husband, but saying something so girlish at nearly 40 would be embarrassing, so let's just leave it at that. My husband didn't just ask me out that one day, he continued to invite me out for meals occasionally. It's natural for adult men and women who frequently dine together to develop a romantic relationship. We started dating, and 2 years later, as we both turned 40, we decided to get married. Feeling shy about being a bride at 40, I asked my husband to skip the wedding ceremony and just took some photos of us with dressed up. After we got married, I moved from my apartment to my husband's house. His house is a 3-story building with a garden and parking, located in a high-end area. The rent is apparently around $10,000. My husband was living there with his mother. Some might think it's unthinkable to live with a mother-in-law right after getting married. But I'm 40, so I don't mind much. Plus, my mother-in-law is 70, and my father-in-law has passed away, so living together seemed necessary. When my husband suggested living with his mother, I immediately said it was okay. But after starting to live with my mother-in-law, I regretted accepting so quickly. When I moved into my husband's house, besides the bedroom for us, I even got a lavish office room for myself. His house seemed too big for just 2 people, with many spare rooms. Once I settled in, I asked my husband a simple question. Why do we need such a big house just for you and your mother? I said I have a brother 3 years older than me. He left home after college and I've lost touch with him for the most part. He hasn't been home at all, and it's been a few years since I've heard from him, and he's been moving from job to job and place to place. He's such a man that one day he might get into trouble and come back to me and Mom, right? So we decided to rent a bigger house. I think it's a little too big. Well, I got married and you came, so I guess it all worked out. My husband, while unboxing my books and arranging them on the shelf, talked about his brother Richard with a smile. From his story, it seems Richard is aimlessly hopping from job to job, but my husband doesn't think badly of him. Don't talk about that kid. What if he really comes back? My mother-in-law appeared at the doorway of what would be my office, seemingly checking on us. It appears she doesn't have a good opinion of him, unlike my husband. It's understandable for a mother to show a cold reaction to an eldest son who shirks his responsibilities. However, I'm worried that my husband and my mother-in-law might clash over his brother someday. Also, I'm not too fond of you either. Mom, come on. We're going to live together now, so stop saying things like that. I'm not saying you should leave. I just need to make things clear from the start. My mother-in-law walked away, her slippers making a padding sound. I'm sorry. I'll talk to her. It's okay. I got a similar talk when we met for the wedding. I'll build a relationship with your mother as we live together. I took a book from my husband's paused hands and placed it on the shelf. It seems she doesn't like my age. I'm 40, so it's not impossible to have children, but I guess it's a challenging thought. Also, Tom's elder brother Richard is not married and has no children. So, there's a high chance that my mother-in-law won't get to see her grandchildren. That's why she's disappointed and wishes Tom had married someone younger. To her, Richard, who doesn't fulfill his role as the eldest son, and I, who can't fulfill my role as a wife in her eyes, are probably the same. I understand her feelings, but I can't turn back the clock on my body, so there's nothing I can do about that. Once the move was completely finished and our married life officially began, my mother-in-law's coldness towards me became evident. She ignored me when I spoke and tried to have as little to do with me as possible. It's a bit lonely, but since there's no harassment or physical violence, I guess I should consider it okay for now. I can build a relationship with her over time. But more pressing is my concern for Tom. Are you okay with your work? No, it's pretty bad. I need to take action soon, but it's tough to arrange the finances. After dinner, Tom was sitting at the dining table, his head in his hands. I stopped doing the dishes and sat down in front of him to listen. These are tough times. Prices are soaring, expenses are climbing, and customers are tightening their wallet. There's no end in sight. If this keeps up, I might have to close another one of our stores. About a year into our marriage, the situation at Tom's restaurants worsened. One of the 3 stores had already closed, and it seemed another might have to shut down too. Seeing Tom's troubled face made me feel distressed. But my mother-in-law seemed unaffected by these troubles. You're Tom's wife, but you don't help out at the store. You just do your own job. Can you really say you're fulfilling your role as a wife? Our conversation was overheard by my mother-in-law in the living room. She hurled insults at me from her seat on the sofa. I wondered what she was thinking, but she has her own way of seeing things. Tom has been running his own restaurant for nearly 10 years, overcoming various challenges. I believe he'll pull through this time too. You, his wife, shouldn't be making that face. Are you trying to feed into his anxiety and make him fail? What a terrible wife! She shouted again from the living room to the dining room. Her words towards me were filled with spite and venom. I knew she wasn't just trying to fire me up. But she wasn't entirely wrong. I took her words positively and decided to support Tom to the fullest, smiling reassuringly at my anxious husband. A year later, just as she said, Tom managed to turn the situation around and avoided closing a second store. See, I told you. A stupid wife who can't even trust her husband. Don't drag Tom down. As a side effect, my mother-in-law, who had previously ignored me, started lashing out at me without reservation. The relationship with her might seem to have worsened, but since Tom's business is doing well, I'll consider it a break-even situation. I thought things were balancing out, but it turned out to be a clear negative for me. Tom, having stabilized the business and with a bit more money, seemed to get carried away, and I heard rumors about his affair. What on earth is he thinking? If there's extra money, there are surely better ways to spend it. Also, it's strange how bad situations tend to pile up. Having seen Tom's business revenue drop, I know this all too well. But I never thought it would happen to me. Tom. Richard called. From my brother? Yes. Richard's girlfriend is pregnant. That's great news. She's a 32-year-old who worked at the same bar. And, Tom, they ask something. What? You're being so formal all of a sudden. Richard is a freelancer, and so is his pregnant girlfriend. With a baby on the way, they're struggling. They asked if they could move into this house. And they want to work at your restaurant. I was contemplating how to confront Tom about the affair from the dining room. Then, my mother-in-law came into the living room and started talking to him. The conversation was about Richard, whom I've never met, and I was completely left out as they continued talking. It was a strange scene. She used to dislike Richard for not fulfilling his role as the eldest son. Yet now, she was asking Tom to welcome him. The reason was simple: the grandchild. She had given up hope of seeing a grandchild but now saw an opportunity and completely changed her stance. She was even planning to offer them a home and jobs. Tom, who never thought badly of Richard, had rented this big house for such a time. But the situation has changed, and now I'm here. Is it not odd to have Richard and his family move in? I looked at Tom in the living room from the dining area. He was looking back at me with a clearly troubled expression. Come on, it's a good thing. Richard is in trouble, and you, Tom, have the means to help him. Ah, okay, I got it. I sighed at Tom's inability to say no to his mother. I had hoped he would stand up to her, but it seems it was just wishful thinking. He kept glancing at me, probably worried about my reaction. The worsening relationship with my mother-in-law, Tom's affair, now living with Richard and his family, the problems just keep piling up. Overwhelmed and not knowing where to start, I decided to abandon thinking for today and just go to sleep. The next day, being a holiday and probably due to extreme mental fatigue, I slept in until late morning. Tom was at work, so it was just my mother-in-law and me at home. Dreading what she might say about my sleeping in, I reluctantly headed to the living room. You sure slept in. Must be nice to have such leisure. Bracing myself for her usual nagging about not fulfilling my duties as a wife, I tensed up, ready for her words. However, what she said easily surpassed my expectations. You heard Tom and me talking yesterday, right? Richard and his wife are coming back for a maternity leave visit, so move your stuff out to the yard. Excuse me? Was I still groggy from sleep? She really meant I should live in the yard? Or was she telling me to leave the house? You can't have kids anyway. You don't help with Tom's work. So, you should at least make room for Richard and his family. We have 2 spare rooms left, so if you leave and your office is free, we can have a bedroom and a nursery for Richard's family, and a storage room for their stuff. Don't you think the room count and usage are just perfect? It seemed she was indeed telling me to leave. But a storage room for Richard's family? I'm being kicked out to make room for a space that doesn't seem necessary. Originally, I was allowed to use the office because there were spare rooms, and I don't mind if it's gone. A bedroom for Tom and me is enough. Richard's family can live here without me leaving. Realizing that my mother-in-law now sees no reason for me to be in this house as a wife since she can see her grandchild. And I'm paying $10,000 in rent. I'm too tired to deal with all this. I decided to clear my mind and give my brain a rest. silent with my mother-in-law. The only sound in the living room was the ticking of the clock. Okay, time to leave. Having rested my mind, I decided it's too much trouble to worry about what happens to Tom, my mother-in-law, Richard's family, and their future. I chose to leave the house. Understood. I'll leave. I can't put all my belongings in the yard, so I'll come back later to pick them up. You're leaving? Thank you. That helps. Ignoring my pleased mother-in-law, I started packing my things and left the house. 7 seconds after stepping out the door, I took out my phone and called a junk removal service. My decision, made after stopping my overthinking, couldn't be stopped by anyone. Let them all regret this choice later. Having left the house, I decided to stay at a hotel for the time being. I had called the junk removal service, but they needed some time to prepare. This worked out since I wanted some time too. 2 weeks after leaving, I rented an apartment and started living alone. I haven't heard from Tom since then. He probably thinks I'll come back eventually. The thought of Tom taking the current situation lightly infuriates me. However, today is the day after his restaurant's day off. I expect a call from Tom when he visits the restaurant for lunch prep. Hey! What's going on here? The restaurant is completely empty. Just as I thought, Tom called. I could explain over the phone, but it would be more efficient if your mom was there too. I'm heading to the house now, can you come back? You can't open the restaurant anyway, right? I couldn't help but laugh before hanging up, amused by Tom's reaction. He must be quite shocked. Still chuckling, I started getting ready to leave. What on earth is this? The restaurant's fridge, cooking equipment, tables, all the important stuff is gone. You did this, didn't you? Do you think you can get away with this for free? As soon as I arrived at the house, my mother-in-law started yelling at me. It seems Tom had explained half of the situation. There was an unfamiliar couple in the living room. Apparently Richard and his wife. They looked confused and anxious, not fully grasping the situation and my mother-in-law's extreme anger. Why would you do such a thing? The restaurant can't operate now. It's my restaurant, so there shouldn't be a problem with me starting the closing process or having the items I bought disposed of by a junk removal service, right? Huh? Your restaurant? What are you talking about? Why don't you explain, Tom? You haven't told your mom, have you? You remember that I still has the main restaurant and the second branch, and the second one was in a financial crisis, right? Yes, of course. You worked hard to turn it around, changing the tables, chairs, signboard, the restaurant's atmosphere, bringing in new cooking equipment, expanding the menu, and replacing the fridge and freezer to accommodate the new menu, right? Well, about that. Anna actually paid for those expenses. What? What do you mean? Hearing Tom's words, my mother-in-law looked perplexed. She seemed to be trying hard to understand, but probably lacked the full information to grasp everything. Tom continued, looking uncomfortable as if he was holding back a bathroom break. Seeing that this was going nowhere, I decided to explain. Before turning 40, I was single and working in IT consulting. We didn't have a wedding ceremony, nor did we buy a new house after getting married. So, I had saved up quite a bit of money. I lent Tom $200,000 to help turn around his struggling second restaurant branch. $200,000? But you can't just hand over such a large amount of money to your spouse, right? That's why I decided to buy the rights to the second branch and become its owner. I left most of the management to Tom, so there wasn't much for me to do as the owner. The only change was that Tom shifted his focus from the main branch to the second one for its recovery. When Tom's restaurant was in a crisis, I too showed my concern alongside him. It was when my mother-in-law yelled at me for not showing enough trust in my husband that I decided to support Tom to the fullest. My form of support was giving him the money I had saved during my single years. Tom, is this true? Yeah, it's true. She said it was okay if I failed and wasted the $200,000. She gave me the money. But since it was such a large amount, if it was going to fail anyway, she suggested becoming the owner. The plan was to pay back the borrowed $200,000 from the restaurant's earnings, but it was simpler for Anna to become the owner and have the restaurant's income go directly to her. It also meant that she could decide whether to close the restaurant or not.
It's a lie! Can something like that really happen?
I understand it's hard to believe hearing this all of a sudden. That's why I brought some evidence. I spread documents like the business license, transfer of rights agreement, and lease agreement on the table, proving that I was the owner of the restaurant. My mother-in-law's face turned red as she confirmed my name on those documents.
Why didn't you say anything about this?
You always talked about how you believed in Tom and how the restaurant was recovering, right? Even before we got married, you always encouraged Tom like that. He felt pressured by your words but tried to live up to your expectations, not wanting to disappoint you as the head of the household. You're pretty cold to people like me and Richard, who don't fulfill their roles, right? That's why Tom couldn't tell you he borrowed a large sum of money from me.
He could have just told me.
That's why Tom couldn't speak his mind, because she gets upset easily. People like my mother-in-law often don't realize they're putting pressure on others. They might think it's just a small thing to say, but for the one under pressure, it's a huge burden, not something they can easily talk about. And even if they did speak up, she would likely be disappointed and start complaining. It was essential not to let Tom's spirit break under her constant jabs, especially when the restaurant was finally turning around. That's why I kept quiet too. But I really wished she had refused when Richard and his family were coming back. Probably, Tom thought it was work-related and agreed without thinking much. Mom, Anna, I'm sorry. This situation is my fault for not being decisive enough. If I had managed the restaurant well from the start, Anna wouldn't have had to lend her money, and if I wasn't such a weakling, I could have told you the truth. If Anna decides to close the restaurant, then that's it. But what about the part-time workers? Don't worry, in the past 2 weeks, I've already informed everyone about closing the restaurant, and they've all understood. For those interested, I've arranged part-time work at other restaurants through my IT consulting contacts. That's a relief. That was my only concern. So everyone was in on this? Anna showing me an empty restaurant as a surprise and everyone keeping the closure from me. Tom, I'm sorry too. I've been pressuring you. And Anna, I'm sorry for everything up to now. I won't tell you to leave again. Tom and my mother-in-law apologized, and it seemed as if everything was resolving nicely. But that's a misunderstanding. I'm far from being satisfied, and the discussion is far from over. Let's settle this matter next.
What, this? A divorce paper?
When I placed the divorce papers on the table, Tom picked them up in shock.
What does this mean? Why a divorce? This is supposed to be a reconciliation, right?
Don't just assume we've reconciled. You might think it's a secret, but I know about your affair with the part-timer. All the part-time workers knew about it too.
That's just a rumor. You can't say things like that without proof.
I displayed an image on my smartphone that a part-time worker had sent me and placed it on the table, amidst the scattered documents. This, a photo of entering a hotel. It was taken by one of the part-timers. If you leave the restaurant together and walk towards the nearby hotel district, anyone can take such evidence, not just the police or detectives. Did getting the second branch back on track give you too much confidence? You really got carried away. As the owner of the restaurant, I couldn't do much in terms of day-to-day operations. But I couldn't just stay away from the restaurant, so I made it a point to visit from time to time. That's when the part-time workers complained to me about Tom's affair and asked for my help. When I promised to handle it, they provided incredible support. The information about Tom's affair was leaked, they sent me proof, and even kept silent about the restaurant's closure from him. Wait a minute. Closing the second branch and a divorce. What's going to happen to the rent for this place? The rent for this place? What do you mean? I haven't mentioned that yet. I've been paying the entire rent of $10,000 a month for this house. Is that also true? It's true. When the restaurant's revenue started falling, Anna started paying half of it. But as revenue continued to drop, the amount she had to cover increased. Eventually, I ended up paying it all. $10,000 a month is the same as my salary. So, I paid all the rent, and Tom covered other living expenses like food and utilities. So, if Tom gets divorced and only has the main restaurant left, obviously, living here won't be an option anymore. Tom and my mother-in-law seemed deflated after hearing my words. They slumped as if they had exhausted themselves in a boxing match. Richard and his wife, now somewhat understanding the situation, hesitantly joined the conversation.
What? What does that mean? We came back here and can't live here? Wait, Richard. This is different from what we heard. We thought everything would be fine once we got back home.
Sorry, Richard. Right now, I don't have the means to help you with a restaurant or a house.
Come on, do something. We're having a baby. At least give me a job.
We have enough part-timers. In fact, we need to cut down on staff costs.
Tom will work hard, so just wait a bit longer. That's what I'm talking about. Stop saying things like that. Hey! What about my house and job now?
Tom, my mother-in-law, and Richard started arguing about their future lives. Richard's wife, whose name I still didn't know, looked uncomfortably out of place. I had delivered the news about the restaurant's closure and the divorce, so my business here was done. I was tired of constantly trying to smooth things over with Tom and his family. And I refused to live with Richard and his wife. I don't care what happens to this house next. They can discuss it amongst themselves. I left the house amidst their shouting. After that, having evidence of the affair, I was able to divorce Tom smoothly. I could have demanded alimony for the affair, but I had a job and didn't need the money. I wanted as little to do with my ex-husband and his family as possible, so I didn't ask for any compensation. After our divorce, my ex-husband Tom, unable to afford the rent, had to leave the house with his whole family. At that time, financially and emotionally strained, Tom, who had been taking care of his mother, argued that it was actually Richard's responsibility as the eldest son. Of course, Richard, who had come back without any money, couldn't possibly take care of her. This led to an ugly fight between the brothers about who should take care of their mother. In the end, with no income, Tom had to take her in, but this fight ruined the relationship between the brothers. As a result, Richard and his wife disappeared again, cutting off all contact. Witnessing the brothers dispute over her, the mother-child relationship also deteriorated. Now, Tom and his mother are living together reluctantly in a smaller apartment. It's not as spacious as the previous house, and they have to see each other all the time, but they hardly talk, creating an awkward atmosphere in the house. My actions, prompted by thinking ahead, resulted in the breakdown of a family relationship. After the divorce, I first dealt with closing down the restaurant. It was a bit of a hassle, but as the owner, it was my responsibility. However, the fridge, cooking equipment, tables, and chairs I had removed were fairly new, so I managed to sell them at a good price. So, adding just a little more money allowed me to finish the restaurant's closure. Though it was a brief period, being a restaurant owner and handling its closure was an experience. I believe these experiences will be useful in my IT consulting work someday. I guess work suits me better than marriage. Convinced of this, I continue to work hard today.